In this video, I'm gonna show you my #1 marketing strategy right now, the branded newsletter. In fact, looking back at exploring topics and how we've grown, I would say 30% to 40% of our MRR came from this email list in some way, either from product launches or from people just getting aware of us and staying aware of us through the weekly email branded newsletter. So one of the main benefits of having a branded newsletter is keeping your company and your brand top of mind for people over time. It's kind of like free retargeting, right? Because people are gonna keep opening your emails every week, they get into the habit, and you're the business that keeps top of mind over time. So when they need your solution, when they need what you provide, they're not gonna Google, they're gonna say, oh, I remember them. In fact, when we get people that reach out to us for demos, and especially enterprise customers, they tell us all the time, we've been in your newsletter for 6 months, we really like what you're doing, and when we wanted something to identify trends, we thought of you first. So before I get into exactly what it is or how it works, let me tell you how I discovered this marketing strategy. So when I first launched Exploding Topics, I didn't know what I was gonna do to monetize. I literally just knew I wanted to have something in the trend space because I saw it had a ton of potential. It was really untapped. After we launched the site and product hunt and it did really well, I realized it had potential, but I didn't know which route to go with. Like, we were gonna originally go with sort of a paid newsletter option, and then we're considering SaaS. And it just takes time to sort of flesh this stuff out. And in the meantime, I kind of went with this when in doubt, build your email list strategy, because I knew we'd really never regret building an email list. Today, our weekly Exploding Topics newsletter is a huge growth driver for our business. We have about 90,000 email subscribers with a 50% open rate. I already kind of knew this strategy was untapped. When I ran Backlinko, I did have a newsletter and that grew to 200,000 subscribers, but the open rate wasn't nearly as good because I wasn't really consistent with it. So with Exploding Topics, I sort of switched things up in terms of the approach into something I called a branded newsletter. So a branded newsletter has 3 main things that make it different than your traditional newsletter. So first and foremost, you want your newsletter to have a unique name. And when I say unique name, I basically mean a brand for your newsletter. That's why it's called a branded newsletter. So for Exploding Topics, we call our newsletter Exploding Topics Tuesday because we send it on Tuesday and it's from Exploding Topics. So the name doesn't have to be anything special, but it is important to have a name for your newsletter that's distinct from just your general business or your name. Even Tim Ferriss, who has a massive audience, he has a branded newsletter called 5 Bullet Friday, and that's a branded newsletter that's separate from his personal brand. Morning Brew is another example of a branded newsletter. Like, that's literally the entire business is Morning Brew, and it sold for millions of dollars. That's how valuable a branded newsletter can be. The second element of a branded newsletter is that it's sent at the same time and day, each day or week, depending on the cadence that you have. That way people sort of build up a habit of opening it and receiving it at the same time. In fact, Exploring Topics, we do 2 to 3 product launches per year to the same exact list as the newsletter list, and we get really great open rates and very low unsubscribe rates. That's partially because we don't really spam people, it's a pretty light launch, but also because we provided so much value over a period of time, people just sort of accept that. Like, okay, we understand you're gonna sell now and again, and that's perfectly fine. And because every week you're just providing value, it's okay to pitch something every now and again. And because people have the habit of opening our emails, when we send any email, whether it's a pitch or a newsletter, people are just in the habit of opening it. So even our launch emails have like a 40% open rate. So yeah, just because you have a branded newsletter doesn't mean you can just spam like crazy on the days you're not sending a newsletter, but it does help you establish trust and establish this habit of opening emails. So then when you do have a launch, people are gonna be much more receptive to it. In fact, with Exploring Topics, we have a 50% open rate and 90,000 subscribers. And the reason we have that open rate is, yes, the content's really good, yes, the deliverability is really good and all that stuff, but the main reason is that people at 9 a.m. Eastern on Tuesdays expect this newsletter and they open it. And a lot of daily newsletters like The Hustle and Morning Brew, they have huge lists, way bigger than ours, and they have 40 to 50% open rates because people just get into the habit of seeing them at the same time in their inbox and opening them at the same time. The last element of a branded newsletter is the format. This is something that I didn't have with Backlinko. So with Backlinko, when I launched a blog post, I had a template for that, and then when I was telling a story, I'd have a template for that, and when I launched a product, I would have a template for that. It wasn't really consistent. Like, you didn't know what you were gonna get. You kind of knew, like, generally it was probably gonna be about SEO, it might tell a little story, but it didn't really have anything consistent in terms of every newsletter you got was different. With the branded newsletter, it's really important that the format is almost exactly the same each time. That doesn't mean it needs to be boring because the format can be the same, but the content can be totally different. If you look at an example like 5 Bullet Friday, every week it's different bullets. But The format is exactly the same every single week. And with Exploring Topics Tuesday, we send out 4 trends every week that are interesting. The trends are totally different, the analysis is totally different, the types of trends are totally different. Sometimes it's e-commerce, sometimes it's technology, sometimes it's a concept, sometimes it's something that's trending on social media. It's different every single time, but the format is the same. So you kind of know what you're gonna get, but not exactly. That's the perfect ratio of what you want. You want people to kind of know what they're gonna get, but that element of mystery and intrigue is what gets them to ultimately open. As opposed to every time you send something it being totally different, there's only an element of intrigue and mystery. Like they don't know what they're gonna get, so it's very easy to skip over, as opposed to something that's familiar, but also a little bit different. That's the combination that you want. So if you want to get started with your own branded newsletter, where do you start? Where to begin? The number one thing is figuring out a format that's relatively easy to just plug and play. You should have a number of bullets, maybe links to stuff. The idea is that you can just fill in the blanks every single week. That makes the process just really easy. So for Exploring Topics, it's super easy because we basically just recycle content that we wrote for our premium members 6 to 12 months ago and just basically copy and paste it into a newsletter. Before we had a paid product, when we were just writing them from scratch, it was still pretty easy because we would just go through a trends database, find a trend, and do a little write-up on each one, as opposed to just what should I write about this week. Just takes the pressure off. You just have to fill in the blanks. It can be links to stuff. It can be 5 quotes. It can be just about anything. Like the idea is that it should be these little discrete items that you can sort of fill in the blanks, and it makes it easy to produce every week, and people kind of know what they're gonna get because you have those little discrete items that are the same every week, but the items themselves are different. For example, let's say your target audience are made up of people in video and photography. You create a newsletter where it's 5 AI editing tools, 5 tools for wedding photography, 5 tools for outdoor photography. And the idea is that every week it's 5 tools. 5 Tools Tuesday. Boom, there you go. There's your branded newsletter. That's the type of thing that works best for everyone. It's easy to put together for you, and people really like them. So now I'd like to hear from you. Are you subscribed to any branded newsletters? I love to hear examples of branded newsletters. So leave a comment below with the favorite one you're subscribed to, and I'll see you in the next video.